This popcorn-style review contains scenes from another video. Monogatari series Off and Monster Season shows us where the Monogatari franchise seems to be moving in a post-Owari Monogatari sort of way. What happens to the characters after the story ends? One could almost view this as a sort of epilogue or punchline. And it goes to show us through the stories of exploring Shinobu's backstory and sort of developing the character of Nadeko and showing us what's going on with Araragi and his college, and also sort of giving us a little insight to Ononoki and Tsukihi that the Monogatari series does still have some left in the tank. So, kicking us off with Tsukihi Undo is an arc where apparently Araragi regularly buys Ononoki ice creams, probably just to be nice or whatever, and Ononoki gets caught eating an ice cream by Tsukihi, which is a pretty big problem because Tsukihi has been assuming she's a plushie the entire time, and so she ends up creating this elaborate scheme to convince Tsukihi that she is a magical girl from a different dimension, her words not mine, and that she is temporarily possessing the body of Tsukihi's doll so that she can fight a monster in town. And this harebrained scheme escalates wildly out of control. They almost end up burning down a park. It's kind of crazy. The arc itself, I feel like, accomplished very little, but it did give us a little bit of an insight into, one, how Nadeko is doing after the Hitagi end arc. We're getting to see a little bit more of short-haired Nadeko. Not the best Nadeko, but hey, what are you going to do about it? And it gives us a little more insight into the character of Tsukihi, and also sort of explains why the Ogi assassination attempt of her failed. Although I don't think we needed to know that, and I'm not sure the story is better fleshed out by that. But on the other hand, it does give us a little bit more into Tsukihi's mindset and mentality. This is a one-episode arc, as far as the anime goes, so I don't think much was trying to be accomplished. It's more the setting of the stage, I think, for what we would be getting more into with Off and Monster Season. There's nothing like too heavy. There might be something to dig in here, like a big setup if he's going for like a bigger arc in the future, and I just don't know about that yet, but it really does seem like this is just like, here's a short side story. Nadeko Draw is an arc where we find out that Nadeko is being told that once her middle school years end, so by the end of the year, she needs to either go to high school or get a job by her parent. I believe you don't have to go to high school in Japan. Anyway, so apparently, her and Ononoki have become friends as of the end of the Tsukihi Undo arc, and so Ononoki is like, hey, since you haven't become a manga artist, here's what we can do. We can use my specialist abilities, my Shikigami powers, and we'll make 4 Shikigami of you, and we'll have them help you get better at drawing manga. And so what happens is, in order to differentiate them, they're all given different hairstyles. But because they're given different hairstyles, they're given like Nadeko's hairstyles throughout the course of the series, and this causes them to each have different personalities that Nadeko has exhibited throughout the course of the series. And this goes horribly wrong, because what you end up with is like the flirty one that tried to seduce Araragi. You get the fucking crash out that like kicked a desk across her school. You get the like shy one that she was introduced with, where she was like nailing the fucking snakes to the tree. And then of course you get the absolute batshit God Medusa arc one. So these get unleashed onto the city, and this is where we're really into the Ononoki keeps fucking up saga. Like, if we get anything from Off and Monster Season, it's that Ononoki has, in her abandonment in the Araragi household, become a little shit, and she's just starting to make trouble, and honestly, I'm fucking here for it. Anyway, regardless, Sengoku, Nadeko, and Ononoki end up going through the town to try and collect the Shikigami. Another person shows up, best girl, Ogi Oshino, also helps with this case. Ogi is like really big into this one. Ogi somehow using her oddity abilities to make everyone think she's always been a boy. I don't know what's going on with that. I may have misevaluated what's going on with Ogi in these past few plot lines. Ogi might still be up to some shit. We're gonna watch out for it. Ogi still seems to identify as female, despite constantly calling herself as a boy in this one, specifically because Ogi keeps accidentally slipping up and referring to herself as a woman. So, we're not changing our pronouns in any way. Anyway, also, she's fucking Ogi. Fuck you. Anyway, moving on to that, what this ends up happening is Nanako having to sort of reconcile with the things she's done with her past, with the changes of her personality, and what she's sort of left on the table as she's evolved into this sort of neat version of herself that just keeps trying to become a mangaka. And so we actually see her sort of reconcile with her past selves and sort of take those aspects of her personality into herself to become a more complete person. Again, touching on Monogatari's long-standing theme of coming of age, but this time we get to see it reflected through a new character. A lot of cameos on this one. We even get a vocal line from Senjo Gahara where they have a brief exchange with Nanako that is not worth noting other than Nanako rips a phone off the wall. But I think a really interesting interaction throughout all of this is Nanako, throughout the course of this, gains a cool little ability to sort of create matter by drawing it. And she is instructed on how to do this by the only other character with the same ability, which is Shinobu. And there's an interesting little interaction between Shinobu and Nanako, and quite frankly, I cannot believe that they have such a good dynamic. It's like one of those weird interactions you never expect to work. By the way, since this is literally the last bit of audio I'm going to have to record for any specific arc, I do want to point out how fucking batshit crazy it is that at this point, in the entire series, I don't think we have ever seen Shinobu interact with Senjo Gahara. Nothing to do with this arc, just wanted to put it out there. Fucking wild, right? It's weirdly, Senjo Gahara has not interacted, I think, with any supernatural element after her arc, except for on the phone where she interacted with Nanako. There we go, tied it back. Anyway, regardless, this is a nice little arc, and it doesn't feel like closure. Like, once again, we feel like we're in the season 2. We're in the second season of Monogatari, but for this new post-Owari era, where this feels like a lot of setup, and this feels like this could be a character conclusion, but it also feels like there's room for us to continue to build these characters going forward. Also, this arc gives us an association between Nanako and the Gaian Izuku network. And so we might be seeing Nanako, the specialist, in the future. Interesting. Regardless, as the final bit of Monogatari I have to watch for this, I actually thought this was a pretty good capstone. Not the satisfying ending of the Ogi Dark arc, but it's a nice little way to play us out. And if I'm being totally honest, at this point, I love the Monogatari series, but I am getting a bit burnt out. So honestly, I'm sort of glad it's over. And if it had to end some way, this is a pretty solid way to go out. It basically gives us all of the characters we know and love through some aspect. Oh yeah, and Ogi is driving Araragi's car for some reason, throwing that out there. But yeah, it basically gives us all of the cameos, ties us all together, and it feels like going through the history of Nanako, it feels like a nice little thread tied on the whole little series. That is, of course, until the next season comes out, which has already been announced. Acerola Bon Appetit gives us the biggest meat of Shinobu's backstory, probably even more so than Cruel Fairy Tale, where we get to find out what happens after her country is destroyed, and we learn that what she did to basically become who she is in the future. This really gives us the foundation of Shinobu, down to her mannerisms and her manner of speech and her unique laugh and where she gets her name from and how she became a vampire. We're introduced to her vampire master, whose name is Deathtopia Virtuoso Suicide Master, I think. That was off the top of my head. I don't have anything in front of me to tell me if I'm right, but I'm pretty sure I was pretty close. Regardless, Deathtopia Virtuoso Suicide Master is almost sort of the main character in this arc, despite it being a Shinobu arc. And for the first time I've ever seen her, she has got a lot of really good and interesting personality. This set of 2 episodes defining this arc, showing us the foundations of Shinobu as a character, were absolutely fantastic, dripping with atmosphere, super interesting characters. We finally figure out why the fuck Shinobu's name is like Acerola Orion Heart Underblade. I think I said that wrong, but there's just so much bullshit into it. Because apparently Deathtopia Virtuoso Suicide Master loves creating crazy fucking names for her vampire disciples. There's a dude in this named Dogstrings, and so that's just her fucking gimmick. But most of the time they just call her Suicide Master. She seems to be, I guess, what you would call in other media as like a true vampire or like a pureblood, in that she is easily the most immortal fucking character we've seen in all of Monogatari, that she's just able to regenerate her whole ass bodies constantly, and she is almost completely immortal, even surpassing what we see Shinobu and Araragi pull off in Kizu Monogatari. Regardless, watching this sort of dark, tense atmosphere as they progress towards trying to figure out how to solve Shinobu's problems, and watching this character that you spent so much time with slowly come into her own and become that character when she herself originates as an very more traditional, held back, reserved beauty type character, is really interesting. One final thing I want to note is it's a little bit unclear at the end of this arc because they refer to someone as Laura and someone as Acerola. Obviously, we know Shinobu's name, but there's a sort of implication that she gave herself the name Acerola, and that's not really her name. And so someone is named Laura, and I think it's unclear whether Laura is the name of Deathtopia Virtuoso Suicide Master, or if it's actually Shinobu's name. I think I'm leaning towards the way that is phrased, that it's actually Shinobu's real name, in which case, pretty big drop on that one. Shinobu Mustard is the second to last arc chronologically and the final arc in broadcast of Monogatari to this point. And it starts off with a girl who goes to Kanbaru's basketball club, who apparently has 100 members. Dog, I went to fucking high school in America. 100-member basketball club is outrageous here. I cannot imagine how big their fucking school is. For what is supposed to be a primarily academic school that Araragi and Kanbaru and Senjo Gahara and Hanakawa went to, it's supposed to be like a big name, like hard to get into high school that's like all about like college prep and shit. Yeah, just shockingly, Araragi is in the smart kid school. Anyway, regardless of that, 100-person basketball club? How big is this fucking school? Is every girl in the school in the basketball club? I was not planning to talk about this when I sat down to do this review, and I guess I really care about how outrageous it is to have a 100-person basketball club. Anyway, does not matter. Point is, this girl hates this fucking basketball club, and she wants anything to take her away from it, and that's when she encounters Deathtopia Virtuoso Suicide Master, who has returned to the plot from Acerola Bon Appetit, and we don't see what happens, but we get a check-in with Araragi. What has he been doing since college has started? And apparently, he is contacted by Izuko, who I would say that he is not officially part of Izuko's specialist network, but we're entering a phase where we had Araragi essentially complete his apprenticeship under Oshino Meimei, and the whole bulk of the story almost feels like a sort of journeyman version, and this feels like a sort of graduation test before Araragi becomes an actual specialist, and we'll talk about where I think this might lead in the future. But in the meantime, Izuko contacts Araragi and says she will leave him alone for 4 years until he finishes college if she helps her solve this case. Here's the deal. girls are turning up and they're still alive, but they're basically fucking mummified. And Izuko's like, Araragi, you need to help me solve this bullshit. Now, here's the interesting thing. This arc just flat out confirms that Izuko does not, in fact, know everything. So, because there's plenty of things throughout this trial, or throughout this case, that she is uninformed of. So, that's actually, we got an official confirmation of that. So that does mean that her actual defeat of Ogi was not necessarily guaranteed. So, credit to her for managing to pull that shit out of her ass. But anyway, doesn't matter. Point is, this is essentially a sort of mystery plot point for this arc. And what's, I think, sort of interesting about that is really Monogatari is always a sort of mystery plot, but this isn't like the necessarily like what's causing the oddity or what's happening. Like, this is like a true detective mystery case. Araragi goes to people, he finds evidences, he investigates the crime scenes, he solves riddles, he talks to like a college friend he made, whose name I don't remember because she's never shown up before, but she's like a college friend in cryptography, and he's like, I need help solving this cryptogram, and she's like, I got you. I solved it in like 5 seconds. It's fucking piss-ass easy. I'm surprised you didn't figure this out. I think we also revealed that Araragi is he's like in the math department for his college, which fits him to a fucking T, although I don't know. I think he does say what his major is, but yeah, anyway, interesting information and update. He also mentions hanging out with Oikura multiple times throughout this, even suggesting that he calls her at one point for her to make him food, and she's like, fuck off. So apparently he's chilling with Oikura, so that's fucking awesome. We got, apparently they've reunited and they've reconciled fully and completely. Although we don't actually see her at any point in this, and that is, I think, a little disappointing, but it doesn't matter. So this is a pretty cool update, and I don't want to blow the mystery elements, I think, for this, because I think it's a fun enough ride, but it is cool seeing the reunion between Shinobu and Deathtopia throughout all of these years, and we do get sort of more perspectives on Mayoi as she's taking to her new divine task. Interestingly, her personality does seem to be shifting, and this is actually something that was noted by Izuko, how she's more on the side of oddities now than before. So this seems to be intentional. Two characters we do see who appear out of character, however, include Karin and Senjo Gahara, both of whom seem colder and more distant than normal. Senjo Gahara is always been cold and distant, but not to the same extent that she's shown in this one. And there's almost, it feels like that it's not clear if she's still dating Araragi, but the vibe you get from the scene is that if they are still dating, maybe their relationship is a little bit on the rocks in college, which I think is interesting. Karin, on the other hand, is acted completely out of character, and she was very aloof and aggressive, which is not the Karin we've known till now. And it is worth noting that these two characters appear for a very brief amount of time. And if you're a writer, sometimes you know that you need to have characters appear and you need to write in cameos, but you're not fully in the character's headspace, so you just accidentally write them out of character. So it's hard to tell whether these changes in the characterization of Karin and Senjo Gahara are intentional, or if they're just a consequence of how little they actually appear in this story. And so we're just seeing another side of them in this regard, because it could totally make sense that Karin is just going through a rebellious teen phase now that she's in high school, and maybe Senjo Gahara and Araragi's relationship is sort of degrading. Or it's entirely possible that they were on screen for less than 2 minutes, and then that's just why their impression is sort of giving them that. It's not fully clear. Regardless, this is taking Monogatari in a direction that I had not fully foreseen. Izuko mentions at the end of this arc that it might be time to create the rumor division, showing that Izuko seems to be trying to work with sort of the local authorities, perhaps, or the government to create a sort of supernatural investigation detective division. And one would probably assume, considering she'd leave Araragi alone for 4 years, that she is looking to bring Araragi into the Izuko network fully and completely. showing that Araragi is probably graduating from being a sort of amateur specialist to a full-on actual specialist. And to be honest, he probably could be a full-on specialist. He is sort of developing his skill set to that area, and I do think that's an interesting development to him. We are probably, as far as Off and Monster Season concerned, still in what would be considered the early parts of a saga. Keep in mind that the finale of the 3 parts of the Monogatari season, of first season, second season, final season, occurred over 3 seasons. So Off and Monster Season, there doesn't seem to be a definitive endpoint that like Owari built to. We don't seem to have a clear end goal. And all of this seems to be very much set up, but based on where this would be narratively throughout the course, if we're looking at another trilogy, or perhaps even more than that, we wouldn't be at the point where we could necessarily see the end goal. And so my question at this point is that we sort of have a lack of information. Is Monogatari actually building to something anymore, or are we going to do a sort of Monster of the Week detective episode thing going forward? I actually suspected that Hana was setting up to have Kanbaru sort of take the angsty teenage coming-of-age story that Nisio Oisin is so... Wow, I botched that. Is so fond of telling, and sort of take the torch from Araragi. But this seems like we might be continuing with Araragi into perhaps even his adulthood going forward as a sort of supernatural detective. And it's possible that we could be exploring both routes. I do not believe that any character is going to be left on the chopping block. If anyone steps out of the story at this point, I imagine it is probably Hanekawa, is pretty much the only character I could see leaving and not coming back to be a major player at this point. Because at the very least, Off and Monster Season has managed to basically touch on every major character at this point, even Kaganui. So the only character I can imagine is the one who has canonically went off to go work in, I think, an American university. Regardless, Monogatari is definitely going in an interesting direction, and it's hard to tell whether the characters are changing, or whether the narrative is changing, or whether this is building to anything, but even if Monogatari becomes less narratively cohesive, I do think that the idea of individual supernatural cases could still be interesting, and seeing how the characters update. And considering that the writer is so married to the concept of coming-of-age stories and teenage narratives, seeing how he tackles adult life, or possibly even college life, is actually an interesting concept for me. So I am interested in continuing on with the series, even though it feels like this is all just one really long epilogue. Twitch and Discord in the description. I've been Sacrobolic, your envoy of hope. Bye-bye!